I've seen so much now of the U.S. destabilization of other countries. It's disgusting, and it's just not covered. And by the way, just to give you another journalistic, weirdness, I was friendly with Aristide in Haiti. I liked him. I wanted to help him. He said to me, Jeff, they're going to get me. And I thought, oh, come on, no, they're not going to get you. I'm going to help you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's going to be fine. No, they're going to get me. And okay, I didn't get it. Then, of course, Bush stopped all World Bank loans, IMF loans, Inter-American Development Bank loans. They used the usual financial squeeze to break him, but he remained there and he remained popular. So they eventually threw him out in a coup, and they landed a plane with an unmarked tail, and they stuck him in the plane and they flew him to Central Africa. Okay, I knew a bit about what was going on, and I called the New York Times reporter. I said, there's a coup in broad daylight. Would you cover this? And you know what I was told? The editor's not interested in that. A coup in broad daylight, and the editor's not interested in covering that. That's actually how it went down. And then I testified in Congress a few days later to a committee where everyone swore how much they loved Haiti. And boy, it was so good that Aristide was taken out of harm's way, that the United States saved him by flying him out. You can say anything in this country right now. I mean, our government can say anything in this country, that 6 people in a yacht or a rowboat blew up Nord Stream. You say anything, and the New York Times sucks its thumb and says, yeah, that's what an unofficial senior official said, unnamed senior official in the United States government said, and that seems right. And that's how we are right now. No one's talking, no one's thinking.
So I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about that specific media part. Before I do, let me just, on the substance of Ukraine, a lot of times people say, I don't understand. What they're really trying to do is make some rhetorical point about something not making sense. That's not the way in which I mean this. I genuinely don't understand the following. Neocons obviously were kind of catapulted into a position of power in Washington after 9/11. All their dreams, invading Iraq and having regime change plans for the broader Middle East, were all being empowered. And with the disaster that they ushered in, that everybody recognized, the foreign policy community kind of said, all right, we're done with these crazy people for a while. The second term of the Bush administration kind of reined them in. Obviously, Obama was elected on a promise to reject neoconservatism. And for a long time in Washington, it wasn't just people, like you or like Noam Chomsky, but I mean like very sort of middle-of-the-road, centrist, mainstream people like Bill Burns, like President Obama, like Donald Trump, whose view was Ukraine is not a vital interest to the United States, that vital interest doctrine always being central to how we formulated our foreign policy, what we were and not willing to go to war for, that it's always going to be a vital interest to Russia, but not to Ukraine. That was what Obama eloquently argued. That was what Trump also argued in his own kind of Trumpian way. Biden was part of that Obama administration. That was clearly the position of the Biden administration, of the Obama administration. Now here we are, to the extent that I could discern any interest that we might have had in provoking the Russians into that war, it was accomplished in the first week or two when we got the Europeans to disassociate themselves from Nord Stream and start buying our own natural gas. That was mission accomplished. And yet here we are a year and 2 months later, a year and 3 months later, there's clearly no attempt, none, on the part of the U.S. government to try and negotiate a peace deal. In fact, they blocked them when they emerged. And we seem to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper involved into this war, which at the end of the day is about nothing more than who will rule certain provinces in eastern Ukraine or what will be their status. What changed in Washington that has made bipartisan Washington, not just neocons, but the vast majority of the establishment wings of both party and the Biden administration, so committed to this war, seemingly with no end in sight?
Yeah, Glenn, I think the part that can help on this is that the neocon part never went away, and it was core to the Obama administration. It wasn't foreign to the Obama administration. And let me just illustrate, nothing was really reined in. Remember, 2008, the last year of Bush Jr., was when the commitment of NATO made at the Bucharest NATO summit that NATO would enlarge to Ukraine and Georgia, by the way, was made. So nothing was reined in at the end of the Bush administration. People should look on a map, by the way, Georgia, and not Atlanta, Georgia in the Caucasus. What's Georgia doing there, for heaven's sake? Well, if you look at the map, the plan is to surround Russia in the Black Sea. Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia surrounds Russia in the Black Sea. That's the idea. So that was there consistently from the early 1990s. Brzezinski explained it in 1997. It continued to be U.S. policy in 2008. Then comes the Obama administration, but Obama supports lots of war. And this is not well understood. But it's not well understood. You had Hillary, of course, who I don't know if she ever saw a conflict she didn't want to get more deeply into. But for example, Syria. It's never been explained to the American people. Syria was not a civil war. Syria was a U.S. CIA-led regime change operation that went terribly wrong. And we actually, in our mainstream press, say, Russia came into Syria. How dare they do that? We were in Syria in 2011 with CIA to overthrow Assad. I happen to know, again, because of my role in diplomatic circles, that in 2012, there was an agreement to end the fighting in Syria, but it was blocked by one party. You know who that was? That was the United States.
I was going to guess.
Everyone else agreed to a framework that was being put together by the highest diplomacy. The U.S. blocked it. The mediator talked to me at one point, Jeff, you cannot believe it. It's one government. It's the U.S. which insists Assad must go the first day. Everyone else wanted to do something pragmatic to stop the fighting. The fighting ended up going on many years. At the end of that year in 2011, there's NATO bombing and ending up, driving to his death and creating another decade of real civil war and outside war. Libya, killing Muammar Gaddafi. It was the Obama administration, Victoria Nuland as Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs in February 2014 that participates in the violent overthrow of Yanukovych. So Obama, he had some important good sense in 2014, said, I don't want to get more deeply into it, but it was his administration that played the role that triggered this thing. And how much analysis have we had from the New York Times? If I may come back to my favorite newspaper over my lifetime, nothing, no word about any of this, how this really played out. So the odd part is Trump, it stops in this weird way. I don't even know what those years meant exactly. It's so weird. But there were no new wars. Biden comes in, and it's important to understand, in 2014, when Nuland is caught on the tape, what does she say? How's this deal going to close? She says, I got the VP waiting, and she's talking about Jake and the VP. So the team, which is Biden, Sullivan, and Nuland, they each had one rung lower on their jobs in 2014. You had a vice president. Jake Sullivan had the same job as National Security Advisor to Biden, but Biden was vice president, not president. And Nuland was assistant secretary, not undersecretary, but it's the same group. So the underlying continuity is the main point. And really something I've, basically learned over time, because I didn't get it. These ideas and plans actually go back 30 years. That's weird. But, when a historian tells you, oh, no, Ukraine's already on the list in 1992, and you have in the wonderful memoirs of Bill Perry, written, I think, 2017, when he says, I thought about resigning from the Clinton administration because I really opposed the NATO enlargement. That's all the stuff that, we're just not brought into, except after the fact. This is not democratic deliberation. This is, you try to somehow parse these details and you get snippets of it, or you happen to be in circles that someone explains something to you, or you see something or you hear something, but you can't figure it out from what anyone is saying on the surface, because this stuff is not for the American people to understand. They're just supposed to understand that in February 24th, 2022, there was an unprovoked war by a crazy megalomaniac.
The new
That's
Hitler.
The only thing
new Hitler.
Here's
So this really does lead into the media component, and I just want to ask you about that because I also want to talk about COVID without taking up all of your time tonight. But we played a video of you last night, actually, with Robert Wright, where you were essentially expressing shock that the media has become such an arm of the U.S. security state that they're even willing to say things that are laughable on its face, like trying to convince us that Russia blew up its own pipeline, just like they wanted to convince us that Russia drone bombed the Kremlin. Everything's a false flag when Russia does it, but you can never suggest the U.S. did anything as a false flag, or you immediately get relegated to the sector of being a crazy conspiracy theorist. A main reason why I started writing about politics in 2005 was because I had perceived the corporate media was way too subservient and deferential to the narratives of the U.S. security state when it came to the war on terror. That was a big criticism of mine from the start. It's gotten so much worse now. In 2004, the New York Times came out with a pretty historically significant mea culpa saying, hey, we know we helped sell that war in Iraq, and it was because we were too uncritical about what the security state was telling us, and we're never going to make that mistake again. They're in another universe now in terms of their willingness to write down whatever the CIA tells them to say, even when they know it's false. And I want to understand why. My hypothesis is that Trump really did change everything. His election made a lot of people in elite media circles believe that we were facing this kind of singular threat, this new Hitler. I think they talked themselves into that, and that anything and everything became justified in the name of stopping Trump and his movement because nothing is more dangerous. And they saw correctly the CIA, the FBI, the U.S. security state as allies in the war against Trump because they perceive Trump as very valuable. That's where Rushgate come from. And they, in that alliance, became so deferential, way more so than ever, that they're willing to say almost anything. And yet here you have a very serious war by all accounts, no matter where you fall on the side of it. And I don't even think Iraq was as drowning in propaganda as the war in Ukraine is. It's not just propaganda, it's just completely false narratives to the point where they say laughable things like that pipeline example. I know these questions of why did this institution get corrupted, why are they like this, is always hard. You're talking about a lot of people, there's probably mixed motives. But what is your view about why these media outlets, almost to the point where you can ask a lot of people inside of them who will admit that it's happened, become completely abdicating in terms of their supposed core mission of being adversarial to these agencies?
That's why I listen to you to try to understand this, because it's not a grown-up thing. And I had the strange experience just after Nord Stream was blown up that I ran into a classmate and friend and someone I really like, a top journalist in the U.S. Okay, a New York Times journalist, because I've mentioned it. I don't want to mention his name, but a friend. And I said, hey, I think the U.S. did this. And he said to me, of course the U.S. did this. Who else? And I said, yeah, but your paper said this morning it was Russia. He said, oh, yeah. I said, come on, this is serious stuff. And he batted it off again. And I said, it's really serious. And when you and I were at school together decades ago, we had the Pentagon Papers, we had Watergate, I lived on the New York Times every day, loving it. That's how I grew up. And he said to me, that paper is so dead and gone. It's so depressing to hear that from one of the leading journalists, because this guy's a very talented guy. But the fact of the matter is, they would not cover this Nord Stream story until today. And, the joke of it was when Cy Hirsch made his piece, and perfectly sensible, explained a lot. And by the way, explained that this madcap thing of blowing up the pipeline was so stupid and so reckless that top intelligence people turned to Hirsch because they thought this is crazy what the White House is doing. So that is perfectly
And there's
sensible.
no other way anymore to get their dissent out. No one will print it.
The New York Times would not even mention Cy Hirsch's story. And then, of course, it was, I don't know, months later that they had some absolutely absurd, it wasn't even a 12-hour news cycle of a few people in a boat. And, a few people in a boat that couldn't even have an anchor when the water is 270 feet deep. So the whole thing is so completely absurd, but they played that story. But I think, one of the things, Glenn, that impresses me about all of this is it doesn't really fool many people. It's not like this is believed. The confidence in the media is rock bottom. It just gives something to avoid talking in some way. It's not that they say, God, we really got them now. They really believe this absurdity. And today, I think it was today, you had Radek Sikorsky, who tweeted just after Nord Stream was blown up, "Thank you, USA." And he's walking through an airport, and a reporter shouts out to him, "Hey, why did you tweet 'Thank you, USA,' with the picture of the pipeline?" And he smiles. And they call again, and he smiles, because the truth is, they don't need to discuss this. This is just arrogance. What do they have to?
They're laughing at their ability to deceive the public. They're laughing at the fact that they can simultaneously admit it and then continue to deny it. Ted Cruz was openly giggling with Victoria Nuland at a Senate hearing about how happy they were that this is now a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. Biden and Nuland explicitly threatened that they were going to do this multiple times. And I do think on some level, part of the power that they enjoy is their ability to sell the most preposterous stories, because they don't even have to be bothered with trying any longer to answer to anybody, because the media will never insist that they do.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether anyone believes it or not. So they're not even trying to sell clever stories. They're just selling stupid things or smiling. We don't have to answer anything. But how is it, and I need to ask you, in the White House newsroom, how come there isn't somebody there that's calling out real questions? Is it just that they don't get called on, or that to be in the pen or whatever it is, the pool, I should say, that you don't stay there if you actually want to find out something?
Yeah, I think a big part is, one of the things that really struck me is during Russiagate, when I was questioning a lot of those original stories and a lot of the stories overall, I was getting lots of messages from journalists inside every single one of these major newspapers and major digital outlets saying, thank you so much for what you were doing.